Hey guys, this is Justin. Hello and welcome to another video. So before we begin, just a quick update. We've decided to launch a new podcast over on X2 for those who aren't subscribed. It's basically our variety channel. We do lots of live streams, gaming content. The podcast is meant to be different though. We're all preparing essays on some of the worst movies of last year. I got Megalopolis. It's interesting. Also, we'll be drinking some beers. Feel free to join us. The podcast goes live tomorrow night at 9 p.m. Eastern time, but the live stream is also there now. You can click to be reminded when we start. I'd love for it to do well. We've put a lot of time and effort into this. I may also stream the first half an hour or an hour here. I'm not sure. Anyway, I want to take a second to talk about droid capital ships, and this is a really interesting topic, which stems from a question by Krieg Guardsman. Thank you, by the way, for 7 years subscribed. He asks, how hard would it be to get a droid crew and to automate a Star Destroyer? And I think there's a few different questions here. How difficult would it be to take an existing ship and replace the organic crew with droids? I think it would be very difficult, partially because droids simply weren't built during the time of the Galactic Civil War era to work in that way. The Essential Guide to Warfare goes over some of the major issues the Separatists faced when they tried to use non-naval droids for naval purposes, specifically the B-1 battle droid. Separatist warships relied very, very heavily on droids rather than organic crew members, to the point where some ships didn't even have life support systems. The problem is, there's not just one ship role or ship function you can give a droid. A ship requires a varied and vast amount of labor, and although B-1s could be repurposed everything from pilots to gunners, as the Essential Guide states, any droid cheap enough to be produced in numbers is going to start to quickly suffer programming and maintenance issues when put into these bespoke roles. Here's a quote. Diagnostics and memory defragmentation routines had a nasty habit of erasing the retrofitted B-1's specialty programming and heuristics, and so were frequently skipped. Without proper maintenance, many early B-1's cognitive modules also suffered data corruption and system errors, leading to shutdowns or behavioral anomalies. A ship like a Star Destroyer to be operated at near full potential would need thousands of droids, so the maintenance issues are going to start piling on very quickly unless you are the Empire and you're really trying to replace the crew with custom-made droid workers, which would be very expensive and less preferable to crew, which we'll talk about in a moment. There are also other limitations related to using droids in this sort of role. For one, even droids without cheap cognitive modules, i.e. droid brains, have a degree of unpredictability or even brashness, which makes them oftentimes imperfect for any sort of a high command role. About tactical droids, the Essential Guide to Warfare says, tactical droids were arrogant and pushy at best. They refused to accept roles subordinate to battle droid commanders and disdained organics as frail creatures ruled by emotion instead of the cool logic of mathematics. Occasionally, tactical droids refused to take no for an answer. The Third Battle of Ayefo turned in the Republic's favor when the Shevin Major Hum Gareth was executed by his tactical droid, sparking a chaotic firefight in the Separatist rear guard. There is also indication that while droids are good at performing rote mechanical tasks, they struggle to match human adaptability or creativity, which is why you do see droids frequently employed by the Empire in many roles. Mouse droids do everything from basic maintenance to courier duty to guide duty, while astromechs can perform specialized maintenance, usually under the command of an organic engineer. That's not to say that droids couldn't be used in starships, or that crew requirements couldn't be minimized through the use of robotic help. We've seen many times on the ship side alone that as technology in the Star Wars universe advances, ship functions which may have needed 10 or even 100 people can be somewhat automated, perhaps through new integrated systems. We know, for example, that the Raddus, the MC-85 cruiser in The Last Jedi, could operate on a skeleton crew of just over 1,000 because of automation done to the ship's systems. Now, could it work at full efficiency with only 1,000 crew members? Almost certainly not, but for the Resistance, which was low on personnel, it was a decent option, especially because apparently the shields and other functions still worked pretty well, at least. On the other hand, a very famous example from Star Wars Legends comes with the Katana-class Dreadnought. Dreadnought-class heavy cruisers were a ship with a long history of service. Introduced to the galaxy, perhaps 100 or several hundred years before the Clone Wars. Despite being only 600 meters long, Dreadnought-class heavy cruisers typically required a crew of 16,000, which compared to contemporary Star Wars ships is just remarkable. Although, to be honest, I think if you look at real-world ships, it gets a little more reasonable, but still. The Republic created the Katana fleet, which was 200 modernized dreadnoughts, which used what was known as slave circuitry, which, as the Thrawn trilogy explains, took the crew requirements down to just over 2,000. Now, this automation, though not responsible for the Katana fleet's disappearance, did certainly play into it. Still, I think there's a trade-off there in terms of efficiency versus crew requirements, which makes sense. If you're the Empire, it doesn't. Again, I'll get to this in a moment, but there's also another option. What if you fully automated your ship? You put a giant droid brain in the middle of it, or somewhere, I guess it doesn't need to be the middle, and you let that take control of the ship's systems. Well, that was done on occasion as well. Requisite-class cruisers were controlled by droid brains, although generally were not very efficient and relied on sheer numbers to defeat an enemy. The droid brain could also be moody. I mean, the smaller droid brain on the Millennium Falcon could be. In Dark Lord: The Rise of Darth Vader, we see people trying to reason with the droid mind, and there's some discussion about whether it's essentially being chill or not. An even better example of that is the Eye of Palpatine, which also had an central artificial intelligence, which we see in Children of the Jedi is just not at all able to adapt to unique situations. It follows orders quite strictly and is also more vulnerable to indirect action. So yes, you could make an almost completely automated ship, but it might not be very good. And for the Empire with their Star Destroyers, it certainly doesn't make sense given the fact that Star Destroyers are meant to be used alone or in small groups. I mean, they were meant to have an escort fleet, but they usually didn't. They're meant to be terrifying symbols of Imperial power. You don't want them just flopping around controlled by a dumb droid. Anyway, there are other reasons as well. When it comes to the Empire in particular, they had no shortage of quote-unquote recruits, and recruiting people into the Imperial military was important for governance and propaganda. The fastest way to get people to buy into your government is to have them serve it. That's also true of the families of people left behind. Droid technology is also far more vulnerable to sabotage. That was at play with the Eye of Palpatine and was a major factor during the Clone Wars. It was sometimes better for the Republic not to destroy a factory, simply to mess with it slightly so that things are built, but they don't work quite properly. When you get to a large capital ship, which may need thousands or tens of thousands even of droid workers, you can see how that could spiral out of control pretty quickly. Droids in Star Wars are really interesting. They're incredible bits of technology, but they're also from an era before the internet and before really advanced modern computing, so they exist aesthetically within that frame of reference. They're capable of incredible feats, of performing quick calculations, of hacking into computer systems, but they also have real limitations, and as they develop personalities, due often to insufficient memory wipes, they can become more effective, but even in the rare case of R2-D2, where any of his personality quirks aren't hugely destructive, they can certainly be unpredictable, more unpredictable than a well-trained naval officer. Imagine just a crew of choppers running your ship from Star Wars Rebels. But that's all I've got. I hope that explanation makes sense. Of course, if you're running a Star Wars RPG or writing a Star Wars story and you want an fully automated ship, just say the technology works because it's generally inconsistent and who cares anyway. All right, that's all I've got. See you guys soon. Bye-bye.